There's a moment most women never forget. The messages were warm, consistent, almost rhythmic. Then, nothing. Not anger, not drama, just silence. And the silence is louder than any argument ever could be. You've replayed the last conversation 100 times, searching for the fracture. But here's what no one tells you. The silence didn't start when he stopped texting. It started months before, in moments you probably didn't see. In this video, we're going to walk through the psychology of why men go silent. Not the cliche, "he's just not that into you" line, but the deeper architecture of withdrawal. If you're someone who's ever sat with a phone that won't light up, this is for you. Not to blame, to understand. Let's meet two men. David is 34, works in logistics, has been with his partner for 3 years. Marcus is 29, a software developer, 6 months into something he thought was promising. Both men go silent, but the silence means completely different things. David's silence is a fortress. He's been bringing up the same concern for 8 months, and every time it turned into his partner's tears, then his apology, then nothing changing. He's not punishing her. He's exhausted. Marcus's silence, though, that's different. He never learned to articulate emotional mismatch. He just feels the room get smaller. The texts feel heavier. And one day he stops answering because answering feels like a contract he's not ready to sign. Same behavior, different origins, and if you treat them the same, you'll misread everything. Most people think silence is the opposite of communication. It isn't. Silence is communication, just in a language most haven't learned to read. When a man goes quiet, his nervous system is often doing threat assessment. Not physical threat, emotional threat. Will this conversation cost more than I have? Will my honesty be held against me in 3 weeks? Will I say the wrong thing and spend the next 4 hours repairing something I didn't break? These aren't conscious calculations, they're body level. The pulse rises, the throat tightens. Words that were available 10 minutes ago suddenly aren't. And so he waits. He waits for the feeling to pass, for the right words to arrive, for the moment to feel safer. But the moment rarely comes, and the silence calcifies.
Here's where it gets uncomfortable. Sometimes the silence is protective for both people. There's a particular kind of man who learned early that his anger, when voiced, leaves scorched earth. Maybe he watched his father. Maybe he was that man in a previous relationship. So he builds a dam. He stops talking when he feels the heat rising because he's terrified of what honesty might set loose. This isn't noble. It's damage management. But to the person on the other side, it looks like coldness, indifference. And the tragedy is that his restraint, his refusal to wound, gets interpreted as the wound itself. She's asking, why won't he talk to me? And he's thinking, if I talk right now, I might say something that ends us. Now, let's talk about the mirror nobody wants to hold up. Some silence is tactical. Some men have learned, consciously or not, that withdrawal creates pursuit. The less he gives, the more she invests. It's not always malicious. Sometimes it's the only power he knows how to hold. Maybe he grew up economically precarious, emotionally invisible, and this this attention, this anxiety she feels, is proof that he matters. It's a terrible trade. He gets temporary validation. She gets whiplash. And the relationship becomes a thermostat where only he controls the temperature. If this sounds like someone you know, the silence isn't about you. It's about a man who never learned that power in love isn't the same as power over someone. But recognizing it doesn't make it less painful to sit through. There's another layer most miss entirely: the silence of overwhelm. Modern life has men carrying weights they don't know how to set down. The mortgage, the performance review, the friend who's drinking again, the parent whose health is declining, the creeping sense that he's supposed to have figured everything out by now. And then there's the relationship, which should be the refuge, but sometimes feels like another obligation where he's failing. So he retreats into the one space that doesn't demand: his own head. Not because he doesn't love her, but because love, in that moment, feels like another thing he's not doing well enough. The silence isn't rejection. It's a man drowning who doesn't know how to say he's forgotten how to swim.
Let's be specific about what this silence costs. A 2019 study from the Journal of Marriage and Family found that partners who habitually withdraw during conflict report lower relationship satisfaction. But here's the part that gets buried. The partners on the receiving end show elevated cortisol levels for up to 2 days after a silent episode. Your body knows abandonment before your mind names it. And if you grew up with inconsistent caregivers, this silence isn't just annoying, it's a trigger that rewires you back to childhood vigilance. Is he coming back? Did I do something? What's the temperature of the room? This isn't neediness, it's neurobiology. The silence activates attachment systems that were formed decades before you ever met him. Understanding this doesn't fix it, but it names the beast. So what do you do if you're living with this? First, stop interrogating the silence. The text that says, "Are you mad at me?" he'll read that as pressure. The third call he didn't answer, now it's a demand. And demands make the silence thicker. What actually reaches a withdrawing man isn't more volume. It's a different frequency entirely. Something like, "I notice you've gone quiet. I'm not sure what to make of it. I'm here when you're ready." That last part, "when you're ready," is the hardest to say and the most important. It gives him back the agency he feels he's losing. It doesn't beg, it doesn't punish, it simply holds a door open. And sometimes that door is the only thing that makes coming back feel possible. But here's the boundary you need to hear. There's a difference between giving space and accepting disappearance. If his silence lasts days, then weeks, if it comes with punishing coldness when he finally returns, that's not withdrawal, that's control, or avoidance, or both. And you need to know your own threshold. For some, 3 days of silence is a boundary. For others, it's 3 hours. There is no universal rule. But there is a universal question. Does this silence make me smaller? Does it shrink my sense of self, my ability to focus, my peace? If the answer is yes, the silence isn't the problem. The problem is that you've been negotiating your aliveness for his comfort. And that's a trade that eventually bankrupts both people. I want to tell you about a woman named Eleanor. She dated a man who would vanish for 5 days at a time, always returned with flowers, with promises, with explanations that sounded like poetry. She spent 2 years in this cycle. The silence, the reunion, the silence again. And she realized something brutal. She wasn't waiting for him to change. She was waiting for herself to finally matter enough that he wouldn't leave. That's the trap. The silence becomes a test you keep failing in your own mind, and you don't notice that you've built your entire self-concept around someone else's inconsistency. When she ended it, she said the hardest part wasn't losing him. It was admitting how small she'd let herself become. That admission, that's where the real work starts. Now, for the men listening, and I know some of you are, quietly, your silence is not strength. I know it feels like control. I know the world taught you that emotions are terrain best left unmapped. But silence that comes from fear is just fear wearing a mask of stoicism. And stoicism isn't the absence of feeling, it's the direction of it. Marcus Aurelius didn't say nothing. He said what was necessary, what was true, what served the common good. Your partner is not your enemy. The conversation you're avoiding is not the one that will end you. It's the one that might save you both. Start with one true sentence. I'm struggling. I don't know how to say this. I need a minute, but I'm not leaving. That last one, that's the bridge. Let's look at what healthy withdrawal actually looks like. Because space isn't the enemy. Unclear space is. A man who says, I need 2 hours to clear my head. It's not about you. I'll be back by 8. That's not the same as vanishing. He's naming the need, setting a container, maintaining the connection even in distance. The difference is information versus void. The void makes you fill in the gaps with your worst fears. Information, even limited, lets you stand on solid ground. If you're with someone who can learn this distinction, there's hope. If you're with someone who refuses to, who treats every request for clarity as an attack on his freedom, you're not in a relationship. You're in a waiting room, and nobody's name is being called.
There's a deeper pattern we need to name. In many heterosexual relationships, women are socialized to pursue emotional intimacy, and men are socialized to pursue autonomy. So when she pushes for connection, which is literally what healthy attachment looks like, he experiences it as a threat to his selfhood. And when he retreats to protect that selfhood, she experiences it as abandonment. They're both responding to real fears, but they're playing out a script written long before they met. The woman isn't too needy. The man isn't too cold. They're both standing in different rooms, shouting through walls, wondering why the other won't just open the door. The work isn't to change your nature. It's to recognize the architecture and build a hallway. So where does this leave us? With a question, really. What is the silence teaching you about what you'll accept? Not what you hope for, what you actually accept, day after day in the quiet hours when no one is watching. Because the body keeps score. The stomach tightens when the phone buzzes. The shoulders rise when you hear the key in the door. These aren't random, they're data. And the data is telling you whether this silence is a season or a climate. A season passes. A climate shapes the landscape. If you're in a climate of silence,
You can love someone and still need shelter. Those aren't contradictory, they're human. The highest form of self-respect is knowing that your peace is not negotiable. Not with anger, not with charm, and not with the promise that maybe this time the spring will last. I'll leave you with this. The philosopher Martin Buber wrote about I-thou relationships, encounters where the other isn't an object to be used or managed, but a presence that completes your own. Silence, in its highest form, can be I-thou. Two people in a room, not performing, not fixing, simply being. But silence as withdrawal, as punishment, as avoidance, that's I eat. The other becomes a problem to manage, a demand to escape, a noise to outlast. Most of us have lived both. The question isn't whether you've been silent or been silenced. The question is, in your quietest moments, what kind of relationship are you building? One where both people grow larger, or one where someone keeps getting smaller? The answer doesn't arrive in words. It arrives in what you do next. If this resonated, there's a reason. These patterns don't resolve in one video. In part 3, we're going to look at what happens when the silence finally breaks. The conversation, the reckoning, the moment of choosing whether to rebuild or release. Because breaking the silence is only the beginning. What you say, what you hear, what you refuse to pretend away, that's where the actual living starts. I'll see you there.